everybody, today on bellarenovare we are going to be making over this little nightstand. Hold on. Here it is. It's a pretty rustic nightstand. We're gonna see what we can do with it. So if you wanna see me do that, stay tuned. Hey everybody, if you're new here, my name is Crys'Dawna. I am a furniture artist. Welcome to my channel. If you are not subscribed, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so you get all the latest videos. Also, everything I use will always be in the description below, so you can click on that little see more link and it'll take you exactly where you need to be to get the stuff that I use. So today we're going to be working on this rustic nightstand. And when I say rustic, I mean it is super, super rustic. So we are going to go through, I have the leg on here, but actually one of the legs is not fully attached. So we will be doing some fixing of this piece the best that we can because it is so rustic. You know, we're going to do as much magic as we can. We are going to be filling in some holes, filling in some lines. We're going to be adding some wood you bend. We'll be painting it, possibly staining it, depending on what my client wants. I'll show you how to get the best red painted furniture and how you can put gray B.O.S. underneath it to really get a nice, beautiful red finish. So that's what we're going to be doing today. If you guys want to see this makeover, and hopefully I can turn this trash into treasure, we'll see. Stay tuned because we're gonna get started on prepping the piece first. Okay everybody, so I told you that one of the legs was a little wonky. So what I'm gonna do is they had previously put some 2x4 blocks in the bottom, on the bottom of the piece, but this one's split. So I'm gonna pull all the nails out and I'm going to actually fix this original piece. So I'm gonna try to keep everything as original as I possibly can. And so I'm gonna pull all the nails out. I do use my mini pry bar for this. So my last video I talked about my pry bar. I finally found it. And so here it is. This is perfect for when you need to kind of pull nails out, things like that. So I just use my hammer and pull it up a little bit. And then I'm able to take the claw apart and pull that nail out. So now that I have that off of there, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some wood glue on that piece that is separated from there. I'm gonna put some wood glue and then I'm going to clamp it in place. Now that I have this clamped in place, I'm going to reinforce it with another screw in the side of it. I like to always reinforce things if I can. I always use wood screws when I am trying to work with wood. That way it doesn't split. And then also I'm going to go ahead and put the nails back in, but I'm going to make new holes for it. Obviously, I'm using the old nails, and if they bend, then I just kind of take my hammer and bend it a little bit, and you'll see me doing that here. Clearly it got a little aggressive. You can see everything kind of vibrating, but I reused those nails so that way I didn't have to get new ones. Three out of 4 of the legs were loose, and the last one that wasn't loose, I made sure I tested it and tried to get it out before I just said I'm not going to pull it out. And so what I did is I put my wood glue on the actual legs and inside of that bracket that they had made. So that way I added extra protection. And then what I actually did is I carefully flipped the piece over afterwards and put a couple weights on top of it. And that way the wood glue would set and dry and be perfect. And this one I actually had to hammer in a little bit, but that's what I did. You just got to flip it over and add some pressure and then let it dry and they are good to go. So this piece had previously been treated for woodworm, and so this has so many divots and valleys from the woodworms that it adds a really cool character, but I did want to fill in some of the gouges. And so this piece is not perfect, and you can see that there's holes and stuff, and it's not the most perfect finish I've ever done, but I do really like it because it's rustic. So I removed all the little nails. It did used to have a door on it, but because the door had been off for so long, it just would not go back on. So we decided to leave it off. But what I'm doing is I'm using my Dixie Belle mud, and this is the brown, and I'm doing thin layers. And you can see that with the thin layers, it's kind of pushing back out of those little valleys. And so that's kind of what I want. I'm doing really thin layers. I'm not going to sand it in between because I am doing such a thin layer. What I'll do is wait for this to dry, and then I'll come back and do a second thin layer, and then I'll end up sanding it. So I know it's not going to be perfect. Obviously, these are all over the entire piece, but we'll just kind of fill in the really bad ones, and that way it's not so bad. I mean, it's still rustic, but it won't take away from the piece. One thing I want to tell you that's really important is to wipe off your mud spatula with a paper towel or a rag. Do not rinse your mud down your sink because it can cause problems. So just wipe it off with a paper towel. Okay, everybody, so I did this a little tiny bit backwards. And the reason why is because I knew that this piece was gonna need to be vacuumed and cleaned. And so I filled all the holes, I've sanded everything down smooth. And now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to actually vacuum this opens. So I'm gonna vacuum the inside of here. I'm gonna vacuum down the inside of here. I'm gonna take a microfiber cloth, wipe down all the dust, and then I'm gonna go ahead and give this a really good clean. I am gonna go over this with a blocking primer. Although I'm doing a darker color, so we're gonna be painting this with Rustic Red, okay? And Rustic Red is a darker color, so I'm not quite concerned about bleed through, although you do have problems with bleed through with pine. I'm gonna use Dixie Belle's Gray B.O.S. as my primer. Gray primers are really good underneath reds. So reds are so pigmented that sometimes you have problems with having to do a few layers of them. And so I am actually going to use my B.O.S. on this piece after we clean it to have a primer underneath. That way our red one shows brighter, and so I only have to do a couple coats. So that's a little tidbit for you to get a perfect red, especially for ones that are bright red. So Rustic Red is more of an earthy red, but those like bright reds, a gray primer is really great underneath reds. So that's what we're gonna do. Vacuum, clean really well, allow it to dry, do our B.O.S., our gray primer, and then we're gonna allow that to dry. I'll probably only do one coat of it just because I need just one coat. I don't need two. The coverage is pretty good. And then we're going to no, we're not gonna paint next. I have something else we're gonna do after we do our primer. Oh, wait. Right now I'm gonna go ahead and vacuum the entire piece, get all the dust off because I did sand the mud. And then I'm going to take my Dixie Belle White Lightning and I'm going to clean over the piece. It is raw pine, so it doesn't have a finish on it, but I do want to get all of the dirt off of it, dirt and grime, before I go over it with a sealer or with the paint. Now, there is a part on the bottom that it feels unfinished to me. It feels like there was a molding around there and somebody pulled it off. And so I'm going to add a Would You Bend molding to it. But you can see right here that the molding is actually too thick. It's too wide. The trim is too wide. So I'm going to add a piece of wood underneath there. So I'm measuring the opening, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark it on my pine board, and then I'm going to cut it with my jigsaw. I do have a miter saw and a table saw, but with us being in Germany, everything is kind of hidden in our back storage because the voltage is different. So for now, when I need to cut stuff, I just use my jigsaw. It's super easy, fast, convenient, and I don't have to pull everything out. and I'm using a wood blade for this. So I'm fitting it. I'm going to do a dry fit to make sure it's the right size. And I'm going to do this on both sides. So on both the left and the right side, I'm going to add a pine board as well. Once I've cut 3 boards, I'm going to flip my piece upside down again and refit them to make sure. And then I'm going to use some wood glue to secure it in place. And then I'm going to use my favorite screws that I always tell you are my favorite. Craig jig screws are my absolute favorite when I'm doing woodworking. And I'm going to secure these in place because obviously, you know, if it gets knocked around, I want to make sure that I have extra protection. So that is why I'm also gluing and screwing. It's kind of one thing they say, glue and screw it. And so I'm screwing it at one end, both ends, and I'm going to do that with all 3 of the pieces. And that way this trim has a surface to adhere to. Otherwise that trim would have just broken off. So that's why I needed to put that extra board on there to give it a little bit of more width for the trim to adhere to. Now it's perfect. You can see right here, I fitted it, boom. So now I'm going to tell you how you use Wood U Bend. So Wood U Bend is a product that's actually made of wood fibers. You can stain it, you can drill it, all the things. You're going to need some wood glue and you're going to need either a heat gun, I've got my Makita heat gun, or you can use a hairdryer. And what happens here you'll see is when you apply heat to it, it starts becoming flexible. So this trim comes in that little coil right there. And so what I'm doing is I am heating it up so I can straighten it. And I don't want to cut these in pieces. You can if you want, but I wanted it to be one continuous trim. And so right now what I'm doing is kind of taping it in place and heating it up and bending it around my piece so that way I know exactly how much I need to use. So right now I'm just kind of fitting that trim on the piece without having to cut it. I just wanted it to be continuous. It probably would have been easier if I would have cut it into pieces, but if I already have the length, then I would rather it just be one continuous piece. Once I have it all fitted, I'm going to take my wood glue and my heat gun and I'm going to untape where it is secured in place, and I'm going to heat it again to make it flexible because at this point it's hardened to where it's not flexible. And so you want to be cognizant of that as well, that if you want to flex it and move it around, you really need to heat it. So I'm heating it up again, and that way I can twist it to put the wood glue on it, and then I'm going to put the wood glue on it, spread it with my fingers on this part. I did end up going with a makeup brush later on just because I didn't want all the glue on my fingers. But what I'm trying to do here is I'm putting the wood glue on, and then after I put my wood glue on and I push it to the surface, I heat it again just to make sure that it is super flush to the surface, because once you have it heated, it's flexible and you can kind of hold it in place and it almost suctions to your surface. So with the wood glue and with it being flexible, it really sticks really nice and flush. Anytime I feel like my Wood U Bend is starting to stiffen up again, I just heat it up and then it just loosens right back up and it's easy to work with. So I'm going to do this on the entire thing. I'm going to glue it, heat it, push it to the surface, re-tape it down so that way it's taped and glued in place. And I'm going to do that on the entire process. So because this is trim and I wanted it continuous, it's a little bit more of a process, but Wood U Bend has appliques and all different kinds of things. So it's not always as time consuming as what I did here, or if I would have cut it into pieces, it probably wouldn't have been as time consuming. But because again, I wanted it continuous, that's what I did. So I did it on the entire piece. So it was a little bit of a labor of love, but it's going to make this piece look perfect, because if you can see on that Wood U Bend, there's little leaves on there, little greenery, and that is going to go perfect with what I want to do on this piece. So I had finished everything, and now I'm pulling all the tape off because it's nice and glued and adhered and perfect. And we are going to start putting our gray boss on the piece. So remember I had told you that even this is pine and it could have bleed through, but because I'm using a dark red color, I don't have to worry so much about bleed through. But reds have such high pigments that sometimes it could take multiple layers to get a good coverage. So gray primers are actually a really good option for when you are using any kind of reds, any kind of pinks, corals, things like that. So that way you're not using as many layers of paint. So I'm just putting on my gray boss on here, and I'm going to allow it to completely dry. I'm just doing one layer because all I need is one layer to help me get a better red finish. So I'm just doing one layer of the gray boss. I'm going to allow it to completely dry, wait a few hours, and then I'm going to put my rustic red on top of it. I usually, probably 95% of the time, flip my pieces upside down so I can get every angle of the legs. It drives me a little bit crazy when there are spots on the legs missing, and so when I flip it upside down, it allows me to get every single angle, and that is what I'm doing here, is flipping it upside down. Plus, I can paint those little pine boards and make sure I get every part of the trim. It allows me to get all the angles because I hate missing spots. So my client decided that she wanted to keep the original color. I'm taking my Surf Prep 3x4 electric ray, and I'm taking a medium pad, and I'm going to sand down the top just to kind of smooth it. It's not going to get all the imperfections, but again, remember this is a rustic piece, so it's going to look really cool. So what I'm doing is kind of smoothing out the surface, getting any kind of top imperfections off, and then what I'm going to do is take this inside. So I sanded the top, and then I flipped open the top there, yeah, I mean, it's the top. So I flipped that open and I sanded the inside, and now I'm going to go over the top and the inside with the Big Mama's Butter in Orange Grove, and you can see right here how it rejuvenates your wood. And I know someone's going to ask me what kind of brush that is. It's just a cheap wax brush that I got off of Amazon years ago, and I just use it every so often. So it's nothing crazy or, it's nothing special. You always want to make sure you wipe off all your excess Big Mama's butter after you apply it, otherwise it'll just sit. So I'm wiping off all the excess that I have applied, so that way it soaks really nice into the wood, and it's going to leave a really nice smell and just a really beautiful finish. Okay, if you guys have been following me for a while, you know that I really like to use the gloss clear coat to make stripes and do stencils. So I am using Dixiebelle's brand new silkscreen stencils. This is the Botanical one. My client wanted this kind of invisible stencil on here. It's not invisible because you can see it, but you know, a very subtle stencil. So what I do with the silkscreen is I push it down with my hand and make sure it's nice and adhered to the surface. And then you can also take a microfiber cloth and burnish it a little bit more if you want, but basically the name of the game is to burnish this down to your surface really nice and well. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a cheap, you know, coarse bristle brush, and I'm going to rub it all along the silk screen. Now, I dabbed a little bit of my gloss off. It can get bubbly, and so you're going to see what I'm going to do. I'm going to apply it to the piece. I'm going to go in a bunch of different directions. That way I know it gets through that silk screen, because that's what it is. You need to make sure that the product gets through that silk screen in order to make the stencil. But if you don't wipe off the excess when you're working with the gloss, you'll have bubbles, or it'll be so thick, the white will be thick that when it dries, it won't quite dry clear. So that's why I'm wiping off the excess right now. And then I'm going to pull it up, and I know it has a tint of white, but that's going to dry because I wiped off all of the excess. So I'm just going to keep on doing this on the side, and you'll see me do it on the front as well. And you don't have to do this with other things. So if you're using, you know, the mousse with this, or you're using paint or something like that, and even probably the satin clear coat or the flat clear coat, you don't have to wipe off the excess. But because it's gloss and it has kind of a bubbly finish, and because of the way I'm applying it and pushing it in, that's why I have to wipe away the excess after I apply it. Next, I'm going to use the Gemstone Mousse and Golden Gem. Now, what I do here next, I cannot take credit for. My friend Amy at AJ Vintage Designs actually did this last week, and it was genius, and it works so well. So I'm taking a little bit of the gloss clear coat, and I'm putting it on a paper plate. Now, whenever you use the Gemstone Mousse, you want to make sure that you stir it really, really well. And the gold, actually, if you can see here, it has almost like a gray tint to it, but once you start stirring it and those pigments get in, it warms up. So I'm just using the other end of my makeup brush, and I'm going to wipe this off. But once I'm done stirring it really well, I'm going to wipe all the excess off, get the excess off that end of my thing. If I were, I should have probably used a popsicle stick, but now I'm going to add just a little bit of my Gemstone Mousse. And because they're both water-based, so the Gemstone Mousse line is water-based. Because the gloss clear coat and the Gemstone Mousse are water-based, I can mix them together. And now I don't have to go over my Gemstone Mousse and seal it, because I've mixed the sealer in with it. And I've thinned it out a little bit, so it's going to glide on even better than it already does without the clear coat. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of Gemstone Mousse along that wood you bend molding to kind of make that the botanical leaves pop a little bit. And then I'm also going to go over a couple areas on the legs. So this is kind of the final thing to bring it all together, and that's really it. I wanted to make sure that it was rustic and subtle, but still had a lot of character. Okay everybody, so this piece is done. I hope you enjoyed that video. This is how you can kind of just put little subtle characteristics on your pieces. If you guys are not subscribed, please make sure you hit that bell and then you'll get all the latest videos. Again, everything I use will be in the description below. There's little links, you click on them, it takes you right where you need to be able to recreate this look. So here is the piece, and we just did a little bit of gold, some wood you bend. You'll be able to see in the pictures the stencil a little bit more. Let's get a little bit closer, see if you guys can see them. Can you guys see them? You can see them a little bit. So I did go over this piece with Easy Peasy Spray Wax at the very end and just gave it a nice spray down. Hold on. So I sprayed it down with my Easy Peasy Spray Wax. It just keeps the finish the same. It's not going to change the sheen or anything like that, just adds extra protection. So again, if you guys are not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. And until then, happy creating, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.
Sign was given, it's in the way you move and in the sound of your heart. We tend to fall together, fall in love, and still in the end we'll fall apart. So it's hopeless that we stay close, but it's the life that we chose. It takes time to get it right. Sleepless days and nights. We just need a